So to begin with, this really comes off the back of a report which has been out for a few weeks. So hopefully, most of you have had a chance to have a look at the report, and so kind of look through it. I will do an executive summary in this presentation, but obviously the details are in this a much wide, deeper report that's been created. So let's begin. So there's a few things. Can I just have someone to confirm that you can actually see my shared screen, which is now a list of, yes, you can, great. So the agenda, I want 20 minutes to cover these. It's not death by PowerPoint, but it's a little bit of PowerPoint. In fact, Canva in this case. So we're just going to go through some of these agenda points. So the first one is who am I? Where has this come from? What's going on with this report? So many of you know who I am, but I see that there are lots of new faces here as well. So I thought I'd just introduce myself very, very briefly about the company of which I'm working for and how did I get to write this report? So I actually run and work for two companies. One is AWA Global, and the other one is Deeper Change Academy. And AWA Global is probably the one you've heard about most. We've been around for sort of 10, 12 years, and we've been focusing very much on agile at an organizational scale, as well as the team level sort of operational side of things. AWA Global now focuses on the operational side of agility. This is where most organizations think about what agility is. It's the iterative development process, the organizational delivery of value. And then the Deeper Change Academy is really about more strategic organizational change, which is where this report has come from, really trying to set this up as a think tank, research, trying to figure out what's going on in the world and what's the best way to navigate this crazy world that we find ourselves in for organizations. So that's where this report has come out of, Deeper Change, the Deeper Change Academy. So that's kind of the background. I've been working in the agile space since 2005, 2006, something like that, and set up Adventures with Agile, which became AWA Global around 2013. And then it's been a crazy journey of running consultancy, doing training all over the world since then. But I'm not going to go too much into this. Let's into my background, just to say that I've been around for a while, and hopefully that comes out in some of this presentation. So two keyboards here. Here we go. So hopefully that's not too small. I can't see the shared screen on my setup here, but this is really about why. Why did I do this research? And what came to me is that we've been running these programs of organizational change and training for, as I say, for the last 10, 12 years. And something shifted in October 2023. There was a noticeable drop in the number of people coming on our courses, a noticeable drop in the amount of consultancy, and there were lots and lots of coaches in the news being let off, friends finding themselves out of work for the first time in years, people who are excellent organizational change people really struggling to find work, and yet these are some of the best people in the world who know how to do incredible things with organizations. So checking in with certification authorities and other people who are not just our company, but other agile companies, other agencies, friends, people I've been working with for years. Same thing. So it's wasn't just our company. There was a noticeable drop in the amount of change happening, or the amount of people involved in change. And so this was the reason why I chose to embark upon this. What is actually going on here? And that's the reason for this report. So that's where it comes from, noticing something in the environment, wanting to learn more about it. Next is this report. How did this go about? So this report came off the back of about 300 responses to a survey that I created in August last year. It was quite a comprehensive survey, but it was not about, what it was about was what's changing in change. How are people employing people? How are people engaged in change? What are the names of transformation? And a bunch of other questions really about how do we navigate what's happening out there. I did interviews with clients, with leaders, anyone who'd give me the time of day to find out what's going on inside their organization, to find what's happening in their world. I looked at case studies. So we have a bunch of case studies of our own. Also, we have people coming through our cohort programs and our training, and they bring with them case studies, things like this. So analyzing those anonymously, but looking to see what's happening there. And then also research online and lots of conversations with as many people as I could. I started in August, as I said, and the report was really through the research from August till December, maybe a little bit into January, and then summarizing the findings over that 5 months. So that's the data that comes behind the research. And I'm happy to send this deck out to anyone who wants it afterwards. I'll make it live and then put the URL around. So executive summary. So if you've read the report, great. If not, this is the very high level executive summary. One of the key factors that came out of the research was that leaders feel there is an unprecedented amount of change in the world, macro events, things like the wars that are happening. Certainly in Europe, Brexit had such a big impact. We're still feeling the change from the pandemic, still echoes through, certainly over the last couple of years. The advent of AI, you'll notice the October 23 was when I noticed the big change. October 23, sorry, coincides with the Israel-Hamas conflict, and also with the advent of the AI release, big public release. Remember when suddenly ChatGPT became what? Where did this come from? And suddenly it was everywhere. October 23. So this is there's a lot of changes there, causing a lot of concern, a lot of risk and unknown things happening, which meant that people felt very much overwhelmed and didn't want to take on more transformation, more change. The Agile Industrial Complex, I'm not going to go too much into that in this presentation, but there is a feeling that the Agile world has been saturated by something which is quite shallower than many of us had hoped for in terms of a transformation, and that became what Agile is. And so many organizations feel that they've already achieved agility because their definition of agility is actually quite shallow. One of the big factors, which I've seen in my own experience as well as from the data, was the continued disengagement of senior leadership from change programs. Often, and this ties in with the next part, which is the change agents. I call them change agents. We don't really use that term as a role name, but there are so many different roles: agile coaches, enterprise coaches, scrum masters, change managers, heads of, so many roles. I've just summed them all up as change makers. And the role of change maker is predominantly low authority, high responsibility. And so the people with responsibility often are disengaged. And so there's been a very big limitation on the role of the change agent to be able to actually make the deep changes which we had hoped Agile would bring about. And so there's a disconnect in this role between responsibility and outcomes versus the authority to bring those outcomes. That was nearly across 80–90% of people who reported from that role type. Budgets was another thing which was very interesting. Most change agents reported they didn't know what their budgets were for change, and some organizations have no budget for change despite hiring people for making changes. And so either with the lack of knowledge of how much funding is available or that there isn't funding available, not surprising, not much change is happening. So another factor that was there. The other things which I'll go through, really gloss over, is but just highlight, just mention, is there's still many organizations are working from silos. They're not working on a sort of either a lean or an agile approach of being able to take things off the backlog and then just delivering them. There's still this silo approach of, I mean, it's not so much waterfall, but just so many handoffs, so many dependencies that are stopping agility still. So team structure is still something that hasn't been met in many organizations in the data in the survey, which then leads to lack of product flow, lack of ability to be really customer focused and deliver things in a predictable manner. So these are the kind of basics of what Agile has been really offering us for so many years, and yet the basics of team structures tend not to be there still. yeah, and so my summary really is that many organizations feel like they have reached some kind of agility, but really have only scratched the surface of what's possible. So that's what the executive summary of where we are. So yeah, if you've got any questions and things, do make a note, because there were plenty of time to ask about these things, but I thought it might be easier just for me to walk through. So things didn't make it into the report. These are the things which either through time or just through, could keep on going. There's so many topics. One of them was about working from home versus working in the office. Big topic right now, huge all over the world. It's not, we see the headlines in the US with the big US companies and the government demanding people back in the office, but it's everywhere. It's the UK government also. I know it's the same in Germany. And probably many, many other places around the world, asking people to come back into the office now for X number of days, usually 2, 3, but some are 5 days a week. What was interesting in the survey was this very clear split between who wants to go back into the office and who doesn't. And the people who do, almost all belong to the higher levels of senior management. And people who are less inclined to come back into the office as a whole, not individually, there's always exceptions, tend to be people who are creative, who are in the operational flow of delivery. And there was a really clear split between probabilistically of the numbers of the amount of people in each area. What came out of that also was the level of well-being required. I think that we're still being hit from psychological stress, isolation, challenges from the pandemic, and many of these psychological challenges or traumas, minor traumas perhaps, that people are facing tend to remain hidden from the workplace whilst people are at home. As people are coming back into the office, this is now becoming something which becomes much more transparent, and the need for well-being and care work is perhaps being asked for more than it was, say, before the pandemic. And so this brings back a level of question of how are organizations going to cope with people who are largely traumatized from quite a significant period of isolation. So that's another question that's coming out of this. The other one was how are people actually managing change now? How is there a consistent approach? And most people on the survey reported that they have a risk-averse or scattergun approach to change at the moment. And so there wasn't really a consistent methodology of this is how we're doing change in our organization. This is the budget. This is what we're hoping for. This is how it works. Very clear laid out. 90% of the people who responded said they didn't have that. It was very much piecemeal and they weren't really sure who was running the change. Perhaps a few different people running changes in different ways. So there isn't really a coherent sense of change in most of the people who had responded. This is an interesting one. Scrum Masters are team level coaches. So anyone who's looked at large scale Scrum, for example, less, or other approaches, very much Scrum was intended that the Scrum Master was a change maker in the organization, operating at any level. But that's not the case as what we see out in the world. I didn't see any cases where the Scrum Master was an organizational change agent. So it's just a terminology, perhaps. People feel they need to be an agile coach or an enterprise coach as a label, as a role name. So I thought that was interesting, just from my history with Les. Yeah, the last one here is organizational learning organizations. So many of you might have heard of the concept of a learning organization or meaning-making organizations. And I was actually quite surprised that roughly about 20% of the survey data said that they were working towards learning-based organizations. So the idea is that we're constantly learning rather than you succeed or fail. Oh, am I back? Seem to have lost everyone. No, we're good. So yeah, so that really surprised me because I don't see that very often. So it was really nice to hear whether what that actually means in terms of the depth of a learning organization, who knows? But the fact that people reporting that their organization is at least attempting that was pretty cool. So it's still only 20%, but better than what I expected. Okay, so I'll keep going. So There we go. So conclusions of the current state. I've actually probably covered many of these. Let me just see if there's anything on here that I haven't changed. I haven't talked about, sorry. Yeah, so some of the big thing really is the engagement of leadership and the authority to make structural changes. So this seems to be the big blocker. Many organizational coaches see the changes that need to be made, they understand what needs to happen, but they lack the authority to be able to actually make structural team dynamic changes. And through that lack of engagement, there seems to be seems to be what the big blocker is. Senior leadership not being involved, engaged, or not having the level of understanding as what's needed to make flow happen through delivery. From a tech perspective, I mean, my history is in tech for 25, 30 years, and what still surprises me is that many organizations do not have continuous integration testing even now in 2025. We were delivering these in 2006, 2007. The technology has been around forever, but it seems that organizations are not investing in this. This is a key ingredient in being able to multiple people working on same areas of the code base, if you're in tech, if you're in software, and without people being able to work in multiple areas, you are forced into silo teams, which stops delivery flow. It is an absolute essential ingredient, and yet many people are still not having continuous integration. So that was sort of a surprise. What else have we got? Yeah, and yeah, so that's yeah. So I think we've covered most of those things on there. So let's move on. So future state, complexity is not going away. I think we can all probably agree on that. Complexity is increasing. The lifetime of our products tends to be shorter. They're more complex, which means they tend to cost more. There are higher levels of expertise needed. It's not getting any easier. The levels of competition are hard. The levels of change in the marketplace is increasing. Volatility is increasing. And so the need for tools which deal with levels of complexity with large numbers of people is not going away. This is what Agile was for, to deal with complexity. And so I see that the demand for this, for the skill set of agility cannot go away. We might call it something else maybe, but the need for complexity is still there and it's not going anywhere. AI. So I've done a lot of research into AI. Is AI going to lose all our jobs? Is it, what is happening? And quite frankly, nobody really knows. But I don't think in the short term, from what I can see, there's going to be massive job loss. It seems like it'll enhance people's work. Maybe there'll be a little bit of job loss, but who knows, 10, 15 years time, unknown. But as far as I can see at the moment, the critical element is still people. And largely what agility does, it gets people together to collaborate on innovation ideas, which AI can enhance for sure. But my personal opinion is I don't see massive job loss happening in the next few years. But these are my opinions based upon what I'm seeing and what I've asked about what's happening in organizations right now. So I think that from what I've understood, from what people are calling it, it seems like Agile in its name is probably going to remain a team level endeavor. But people are still needing what we would call agility at the strategic and vision level. This cannot go away, and operational delivery and efficiency cannot be unlocked until we understand a much more strategic view of agility. Whether it's called agility is another thing, because at the strategic level and the senior management level, they're not necessarily calling or asking for agile help at the strategic level, and yet they are looking at what is the strategy. And so I think that there's a naming thing. This is purely semantics, but I think that we're going to for those who are in strategy, who want to work in strategy, I see probably a slight naming change here. Rather than trying to be agile everything across the organization. We know that that would work, that's great, but maybe it's people are calling it different things. Yeah, so another thing I mentioned going back to the office. So as people do go back to the office, I see that organizational culture is going to be back on the table, which is where a lot of the agility really came about. It's like where is it that how do we want to work together? What's the mindset of working together to get things out the door, to adapt to change? And so as people go back into the office, these kind of human dynamics increase. And so there will be my opinion is that there will be an increase in people being asked how do we want to be in our office? How is the culture changing? So there seems to be an interest in that as people go back to the office. That could then bring back a rise of sort of change management, as it were, around how because that is a big change, right? People coming back. What does that look like? How do we want to be now? Maybe this could be a fresh start, some people are saying. Could this be a fresh start for us to try something different? And also, I mentioned already well-being. So I think this is firmly on the table. I don't see how organizations are going to bring people back to the office without facing some of the dynamics that people bring. And people bring the dynamics of their very human nature. And this can lead to challenges, conflicts, etc., that organizations will need to deal with. And so that's just a natural phenomena of human beings coming together. And at the moment, human beings have been bashed around a little bit psychologically, and so that's what we're going to be dealing with. So well-being, I think, is going to be well on the table. And from many of the organizations I spoke to, they already have well-being programs in place, and people that can be called upon to help in certain situations. But I see that developing more because when I've looked at some of those well-being programs, I think that they are a bit shallow. Being a therapist myself, I can actually see the limitations of, where people are scared to tread. And I think that there's going to be an overlap between where people are scared to tread and what people need. And so there might be room there, opportunity there for people to really start thinking about, how do we actually care for and look after our staff in that way. Last thing is just what changes am I doing as an example. So obviously we run a consultancy and training company. These are pretty small. Sorry for being so small, but I can summarize what's there rather than needing to read them. And also you can look at the website as well. So we are changing the two divisions of so we had AWA and the Deeper Change Academy. That has largely come out of this. And we'll be looking at our strategic things and changing the names of courses, changing some of the content of the courses to reflect some of these things, so that we're really looking at operational agility and calling that operational agility and looking for iterative change and adaptation. But then at the strategic level, maybe using more formal terminology like organizational change strategy, customer operating models, and things which perhaps come hark back to a different time, but are still very much based upon this idea of people-focused, people-led, iterative a way of iterative strategy, meeting the customer where they need to be. So nothing's really changed in terms of our core belief structure of what we believe how organizations can be or where we're going to. But perhaps some of the naming becomes a little bit different based upon what people out there in the world are calling things and how the way that they see things. So just meeting people where they are rather than going back and doing anything that was different or historically valid some other time. So I've got a whole bunch of courses and things which won't change. Amazing IC Agile with their great courses. We've got lots of those kind of things which we will continue to run, but we might adapt some of the content over time based upon the new ways of working, going back to work, the dynamics that have changed. So there's some things there which we're updating based upon some of these things. So I give that 10% because I really want you to know that we do loads of courses and you can come on our courses, but also as a way to really share that things are changing and we're responding to that, and maybe you can take ideas from this for your own business and things as well. And that is the end of the presentation. So hopefully I'll stop my share now so we can see each other again. Hopefully that gives a sort of a very speedy kind of walk through of some of the things that have come out of this research over the last six months or so. So what I thought we could do was sort of open up now for anyone who would like to share perhaps what they've seen. Is it different than what's here? That's totally fine. If there might be some things which that you've seen which are contrary to this, or perhaps that amplify what's been here, or any other thoughts, interest, anything whatsoever. Literally open the floor. Questions as well is also welcome. So what I'll do is, if we could, if when you're not talking, remain on mute, because there's lots of us and there's going to be lots of background noise and things. But when you do want to speak, everyone has the ability to come off mute. So feel free to come off mute and ask questions, give insights, share your stories. It's all welcome. And I'm not going to curate who's speaking first unless we have massive clash, in which case we'll use the hand, raise the hand. But for now, let's see how we go. Feel free to come off mute, share anything you like, and I'll stop talking.
I'm happy to share an observation. It's just to get the ball rolling. Um, just in terms of what I'm seeing, in terms of the language that organizations are using, the word transformation is still very commonly used, certainly by leadership teams. And there's many roles that organizations have now as head of transformation. I remember years ago, Simon, you saying that you didn't actually like that word. You preferred sort of a transition because it's, less final, and more of a journey. But that definitely still seems to be very prevalent in industry. But what I'm also seeing an increase of is people talking about continuous improvement. So I'm seeing a lot more roles and teams in large organizations that are focused on continuous improvement. So just that's it. That's my two penny.
Brilliant. Thanks, Noel. Thanks for sharing. Most welcome.
Yeah. And maybe on that note, if I may add, so I also hear this continuous improvement being an emphasis, and this delivery capability, right? So whether you really put up agile on the door or not, it's really about being able to improve your ability to deliver. That's the emphasis that I keep hearing more. That's one. And the other observation is that I think you mentioned this with the leadership, not maybe being quite there, or as we haven't gotten as far as a community, right, to really make a change, a dent with the leadership. I've actually come across a couple of encounters in the last few months where there was an outright kind of like the Empire Strikes Back feeling, like, oh, let's focus more on milestones. Agile is dead now. So it really seems like the pendulum is swinging back, at least in some cases.
Thanks, Wolfgang. Yeah, thank you for sharing. I love that. The Empire Strikes Back. It's fantastic. It does feel like that some places for sure. Arpita, you have your hand up.
So I think I put it up in the chat as well. One of the key things, which I think senior leadership has to really understand what agile means. Everybody comes with a notion, and I've been in the industry for 20 plus years, and I've been in the birthplace of agile. So I've had agile. I was probably a guinea pig on the agile work front, to be honest, coming back from the US. But the problem that I see is everybody's version of agile is different. There are so many flavors of it, and it's always like the new thing that's on the block. Like the latest I'm hearing is flight levels. Like we are going to do flight levels now. Like we couldn't even get, oh, we are doing less, we are doing safe, we are doing Scrum, and now we have flight levels. It's this constant change that everybody then suddenly gets put off, and I'm in technology, and everybody just gets, look, I'm done with this. Do what you have to do. I'm just going to do my day to day, and it just falls apart. I think there is too much of change, and everybody's the shiny new star thing kind of attitude that everybody has, which is probably also creating this big churn. And I think what I just heard a gentleman mention about the transformation word being used very loosely doesn't really give the depth of it. I think those two are my main concerns and why this is a problem right now.
Yeah, thank you, Peter. Thank you for sharing.
And if I could write on that as well, so I did put something there as well. What exactly is the definition of agile? So if you ask about 15 or 20 agile coaches, scrum masters, what exactly is agile? You'll have about 15 or 20 different answers. You keep hearing agile is the mindset. Mindset at what? To do what? We talk about customer centricity. The big companies are more about what the stock exchange is saying. They don't even care about anything, it's what the stock market is saying. What's our share price? That is what they focus on, rather than focus on satisfying the customer. If you satisfy the customer, all your figures, all your metrics will basically shoot up. So there's so much misalignment on what agile is all about. Forget about the frameworks. The frameworks are, once we know exactly what we want to do, are we flexible? Are we discussing regularly? Are we looking at probably the values of the agile manifesto and the principles? If we focus on that, and if we tailor everything we do around the values and the principles, then I think maybe we should be able to get somewhere.
Yeah, thank you, Idris. Thank you for sharing. Chris, you have your hand up.
Thanks, Simon. Something I've been thinking a lot about, when your post about the report was first released, it was quite funny because I had been thinking about and writing about what's the future of agility myself. Right. A couple of things pulled out. When I read the report, all the things that you mentioned about the world is a more VUCA place than it was before, you put it like that, totally resonated. All the upheavals we've seen, I think, have meant that companies are less likely today to invest in 3 or 4 year change programs. And a lot of them are pulling back on, well, hang on a second, let's keep our budget. We don't want to commit to anything for that sort of long term. I know that a lot of the motor manufacturers around the world are pausing or putting on hold, delaying their EV rollout programs for this exact reason. We're not sure what the regulations are going to be in the future and so on. So that's the thing that's a big reason why we're seeing this decline. I think another one is that there's a lot of evidence to suggest that agile transformations don't always work. I know there have been occasions when, yes, there have been some success stories, but I'm going to oversimplify this, and please don't jump on me. There are exceptions to every side of this, but overly simplified, I think the larger the organization is and the larger the scale of the transformation, the less likely it is to be successful. The older the organization, the less likely it is to be successful as well, because there's too much legacy built up in it. With all of that, I think there might be a need, perhaps we're on the cusp of something new, and you talk about the future of agility, whatever that becomes called in the future. I think we're on the cusp of looking at how do we create something that more deliberately and purposefully engages all levels of the organization in a change that reduces to a greater or less degree the resistance to change that's currently a big part of the problem that we face. And the engagement and will therefore hopefully create that support that we also see from the State of Agile report. What's the problems in the Agile? Those two things, resistance to change, current culture, leadership support, are the big 3 things that are mentioned every single year. So I think if we can come up with something that says, here's how we engage leadership, here's how we provide some sort of purpose for the change which engages and helps to direct the change effort. It's not about agile being a solution. It's about there are real business issues and we want to make the organization a better place because here's how we do that. And also to lead the change effort from a principle-driven point rather than practices, because as we know, we've seen some comments up in the chat already about there are multiple different frameworks, and we all have our view of which one's the right agile, your agile versus my agile. And it's just about what we know and we believe in. But all of these frameworks are solutions to problems. But I don't think we, and I'm including probably a lot of this group and myself in this, I don't think we've historically looked at what is this agile thing trying to accomplish? What's the purpose of it all? I know I've been involved in many agile so-called transformations, and like you mentioned about where we have no authority to enact change, but also I've been completely disconnected from why the change is happening in the first place, And if we're going to implement some sort of framework, what's the idea behind it? Why should we adopt these things? And the people I'm coaching, exact same thing. They often ask these questions. I have no answers. I think we're on the cusp of having to create something entirely different.
Yeah, thank you for that, Chris. That's yeah, great insights. I think yeah, you've hit the nail on the head. This is something that did come out. This disconnect from the why. When agile becomes agile for agile's sake, it's like buying a screwdriver and having no screws to screw in. It's like it's a meaningless tool unless it has some, unless there's some reason why. And the leadership as well with to once you've got your why and where you're going, there needs to be the ability to then optimize the organization around that. And there's something there about trust, I think. People seems to be this lack of trust that people have, which leads to lack of authority. So you need a seat at the table in the trust to be able to then have the authority to be able to then make a change. And I don't think that historically agile coaches have been very good at getting seats at the table and building that trust with real people who are running the company, and that I think has to be the work. And where I have seen it work and where it's really worked on the occasions when we've done amazing things and I've been really happy with our work in organizations, it always comes because we've got a really great relationship with some senior stakeholder who is almost like a friend, and then it just works. But when it's like those people over in the distance somewhere and you're trying to influence them, hopefully it's just doesn't, you're not connected.
I agree. I think that we've come up with this a lot. We focus on our need to change the organization, for us to influence others. And I think my personal view is I think we need to stop that and think from the other perspective. It's the organization that needs to do the changing. We cannot change the organization. So unless we align the organization purpose with what we're trying to do, I mean, deliberately and directly link those two things together, it's never going to work.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you.
Perhaps we can talk about this further later on.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Farah.
Hello there. Thank you very much for a really thought-provoking report, and I appreciate everyone's reflections. I think the organization leadership, them and us as change agents is a key point. So I shall strike that question off. What I'd like to do actually is to reflect on an experience, sharing some of your preliminary report findings on LinkedIn and this meetup, in fact, with groups that I'm part of. So not big fora like LinkedIn where anything can happen, but small groups of agilists with whom I've worked and who I know well. And even just sharing the link to this meetup and to a report that I personally found balanced, interesting, thought-provoking, evoked some incredibly strong reactions and quite a bit of ghosting. And after I got over the boohoo, poor me, and put on my coaching hat, I did find that rather interesting. I have a few of my own theories, but I'd love to hear your perspective.
Oh, brilliant. Well, thank you. Well, first of all, I'm sorry that if I've disrupted various relationships due to polarized viewpoints.
That is the world, I think, at the moment. That is, if we're afraid to share what we think, then we are not walking the walk.
Yeah, and pick your battles, I find as well. I mean, all I can say is that one, I'm sorry if it's caused relationship stuff. Sometimes you find out who your friends are by challenging them, and when they come back with something which can help you grow. So I'm always looking for relationships to be, the purpose of relationships in some cases is to grow. And so the conflicts that we have with these things are often the seed of something about to emerge. And so I wonder whether there's something there that could be leveraged in terms of what could be the emergent, amazing thing that's about to happen from something which has been a conflict or a challenge. That would probably be the path I would go down with that. Yeah, I mean, the great thing is that in some ways, I mean, I put my opinions in here, but in some ways I can hide behind what's out there. The research data is what's being reported on. But there's a bit mixture of my own opinion in there as well. But I've tried to always highlight what is an opinion versus what is the research results. And you'll notice if I show this deck later, or if you remember back, there'll always be my opinion in bold to make sure that it's very clear. And I put that in the report as well. So apologies if that's blown anybody up.
Not a criticism at all, merely an observation. As I say, you have a personal reaction as a human being, but after a while, put back on the coaching hat and find it actually really interesting. And if we can't work through these things as colleagues and coaches, then we probably aren't debating very well. So I don't mean it as a criticism, only as this is a huge debate that provokes incredibly strong reactions.
Well, hopefully every time that we find one of these strong reactions, like I say, this is a place where what's happening, that reaction is a link back to some kind of fear, some kind of need not being met, some kind of feeling of lack of safety or not being heard. So if we think about those three things really, then every time we find someone who is reacting in a strange way, it always comes down to that. Do they feel safe? Are they being heard? Are their needs being met? And so when there's a blow up, probably one of those things. So we can then rewind and go, which one is it? Anyway, that's all I've got to say on that. Thanks, Farah. Steve.
Thanks, Simon. Firstly, thank you. The report is excellent, and I mean, it largely resonates with experience I've had over the last few years. Just I put the comment in about that. I believe that we practitioners are largely responsible for our own demise at this point, because the amount of infighting over the last number of years has been embarrassing to watch on LinkedIn with large scale fighting. I think it's it's probably symptomatic of what's happened with Agile over the last maybe 8 to 10 years, where there's been a split between what was its original purpose in order to enable delivery better within the organization, and then moving to a more holistic, we think organizations should do this, so therefore we'll do this type of approach. And I guess we've probably lost our way as well in that way. We've not been able to coherently summarize what we feel Agile is. And therefore then you've got the factions between those who are delivery conscious versus those who are organizational conscious. And I guess that's probably where the missteps have come in, and in my view, it's like that's where we in my view we lose out as well, because then the McKinseys, the BCGs who operate in the strategy space where we wish to operate in that organizational influence and change have all come in, but they've been enabled by, like as you said, industrial agile, the safe, that kind of easy off the shelf. Here's how to fix your organization. I guess my point is that we've kind of lost our way, and that we've offered too many offerings, and we need to have something more coherent if Agile is to exist or to continue to be a good way of doing and being. I mean, I'd love to hear other folks' thoughts on that, but I mean, I guess that's just my observations.
Yeah, thank you, Steve. Yeah. I think, yeah, like we said, there is a lot of offerings. It's interesting in the complex space where there are multiple right answers. I mean, that's one of the defining nature of complexity. And often I think we're trying to bring multiple right answers to organizations. And the mindset is, in some cases, not everywhere, but in some cases is very linear thinking. How do I have one definition of what Agile is? How do I know what the right answer is? If I'm doing Agile, am I doing this? Because that's what Agile is. And when we're looking for that, what we're looking for is a simple answer to a complex problem. And so what we're trying to do is we've got this massive array of different right answers, and that's great if you've got a complex mindset. But one of the biggest Agile transformation really isn't about transforming the organization. It's about transforming what's in here. And when we're very linear thinking in our organizational approach, and we're used to buying in solutions. I've got this problem, I buy that solution, that's the right answer, and that's it, job done. When we're in a complex space, we've got multiple right answers, and that can be very confusing, especially to a mind who's thinking linearly. So how do we then move from somewhere which is okay to have multiple right answers, but a buyer is looking for the right answer? So there's a transformation that has to go on in the brain before this starts. And I think this is one of the things where we go round and round and round with Agile, because you to bring in agility at an organizational level, you need to do it in an Agile way.
Yeah.
But they don't have Agile. It's a chicken and egg. So we end up chipping away. You do it one iteration of Agile, and that works with that platform in that thing in that context, but it really only went that deep. And so then it's like, well, now let's give it another go, because now we've changed the minds a little bit, we can go a bit deeper. And it seems the depth of the Agile transformation is the depth of the ability to deal with complexity. And that takes iterations and iterations to get to. And so we're constantly trying different frameworks, different ideas, throwing the frameworks out, trying something else. And all of this is what it's actually doing is deepening the ability for people to have complexity. And so where that goes, who knows? But yeah, thank you. Fortune.
Oh, thank you. May I comment on 3 points?
Of course, yeah. You're most
Thank
welcome.
you. So the first thing I wanted to say is I was very interested in the observations about return to office. And there's no doubt that that is something that's being driven heavily by our friends in Silicon Valley. You may have heard Larry say just yesterday afternoon that all Google engineers are now supposed to be in office 60 hours a week, right? To build the AGI that will replace them. And I think that's influencing a lot of executives, that attitude. Even though there's really a large pile of empirical studies that show there's no meaningful productivity difference between working from home or return to office. And in this, I particularly want to reference Professor Nick Bloom's report from Stanford that came out last year. So I just find that very interesting, the disconnect between people's feeling, the leadership's feeling the need to control versus what the actual facts and data say that have been evidence peer reviewed and published. I just find that gap something that's really worth examining for us as a community. The second thing I wanted to say was, I guess to Chris's point, in terms of aligning with the organization, of course, this is why I often recommend Deland Kelly and John Shook's book, Change Questions, since they have a whole method and series of workshops to do this precisely. This chimes with Carl Scotland's recent emphasis on the X matrix for strategy and strategy deployment. And I suggest that if people haven't looked into that, they really do, to align with the business and to then actually hopefully create a strategy. There are many ways to do that. Of course, Barry Overeem's been very successful, say at some organizations such as Lego, with the liberating structure, strategy not working, so multi-day structure, and other techniques like that. Then the last thing I want to say is, of course, I was at Toyota last week in Berniston, and this question came from the Toyota staff as to why there were a bunch of software people touring the auto plant. And they talked a great deal about the Agile Manifesto. They were very aware of it. And they talked about how it could be supplemented in the goals of actual agility, by which they mean exactly your definition in your book, Change, Simon, right? A mindset, proactivity, complexity, etc., could be dealt with by taking the basis of the Agile Manifesto and adding certain lean principles to it. And by lean, I mean Toyota Production System principles. Jim Highsmith, as you know, the signer of the Agile Manifesto, has also remarked on this, and I believe that as part of his Future of Agile initiative, he has looked at that. You also see that in the Modus Institute with Jim Benson, Mark Kilby, and others. So I think that we have ideas here that could benefit us as a community if we would pick them up and take a look at them. And then my final point is, of course, we don't change the organization, we change ourselves, right?
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you, Fortune, for all of those. If you wouldn't mind taking a minute or so to write out some of those great references that you provided in the chat for people, that would be amazing, because yeah, I'm sure that there's many people here who would like to follow up on that. Thank you. Raphael, how are you doing?
Hey, Simon. Thank you very much for this great report and organizing this great place for us to exchange ideas. I'd like to share a few things on my side. So from my current organization, maybe not the biggest, we are doing transformation. And at some point of time, I asked my colleague who is leading this transformation, ask him like, what type of transformation we are doing? Do we do transformation to agile? Do we do digital transformation? Or what type of transformation we are doing for organization, not for us? Because if we don't ask this question, we don't know what's the end goal. Each transformation can lead to any other benefits, but if we do not validate that and we do not track that, it's hard to reach end goal. Of course, digital transformation is something, it's ongoing, never ends, right? It's ongoing effort, but at least we should know the path that we are choosing, because to achieving what is expected from us might kind of require different actions at given point of time. So clarifying what's the transformation. And yes, this transformation topic is unfortunately, failing. Like really, the numbers. If we search for the numbers about the transformation, I think like all of us can put a little bit from ourselves there. We are kind of failing there. So that's the big question. And then the other topic, if we merge this with a topic of agile wars that we can see on LinkedIn, and someone who has no expertise or not such deep expertise as we share here in the agile, and then you would like to hire someone from agile community to do the transformation here, but you know that in their family they cannot agree with each other, they're fighting. It's hard to build the trust, like, okay, they don't know by themselves what is the best. They're fighting with each other. So how they are going to help us? We were more focused, I believe, in myself as well, in like sub-optimizing something instead of delivering value to our customers, to our companies. Yeah. So we lose a bit of focus on what is actually the game plan and to what kind of game we are playing, what we are trying to achieve. It's not about, let's say, one of the metrics of the agile transformation is adoption of the Scrum by the teams. But is that really a goal? Yeah. Is that really what companies care about? Like how many teams adopted Scrum? Or maybe they are more interested in value that they are getting, it's like measured by something that is meaningful for the organization. So this is another thing. And
it's very interesting what you say around there being this, it's come up a couple of times actually about this sort of conflict of different things of what the transformation means. So looking at it from, is it a transformation of the value chain? Is it a transformation of the mindset? Is it a transformation of operations, strategy, vision? Is it a transformation of, different frameworks? What is it? What's actually being transformed? And maybe there's actually quite a lot of things that need to be transformed for any one of them to work. Thank you, Raphael, for your input.
Yeah, but before we start transforming, we should understand this one thing. And one of the topics that was mentioned is trust. And also I heard Lean. I'm a big fan of that. And what helped in my current organization is to start small, start with a Gemba walk, start improving life of the people that they are dealing with the real life and the real challenges right now. Help them to earn some time, to gain some time, bringing automation, bringing some simplification of the processes that they're running, and then we can buy their time to work on transformation and bringing more agility in their organization. So, my few cents. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing. Michael, I'm just going to quickly put my light on, but yeah, I can still hear. Yeah.
Hello. So I wanted to, I mentioned to Simon before this session after reading the report that I was very interested in it and appreciate what he's done. I'm too lazy to do all the research that you did, so I did a series of constellations by myself and shared them with people. And so you won't be surprised that I have a developmental response to where we're at right now, which is, if you read my book Agile Transformation or Lalu's book Reinventing Organizations, Agile is a pluralistic green and evolutionary teal kind of a methodology, and it's implanted in achievement orange organizations, and they don't want what we have. they want the cost cutting, they want better customer service, they don't want self-organization, they don't want real empowerment, I don't believe. They certainly don't want change to their way of leading. And that's what it would require to do a transformation, in my opinion. So when I set up Change Catalyst, by which I meant Agile coaches, my target audience, they were looking at traditional orange organizations, which was looking at fear and uncertainty. And I was like, now that's interesting. Whereas there was emerging organizations and modern ways of working that were not being looked at by Change Catalysts, but were sitting there sort of receptive, open. For me, we've gone through a period of, we got all kinds of people in that were really not appropriate for doing what Agile is about. They were experts, and experts like to be right. They don't like to actually shift things. They want to be right. And that's what we have shit tons of coaches that just want to be right. So we got where we are. So for me, there's a pivot to a different kind of organization that's emerging, that's definitely out there, but they're not Fortune 1000 companies for the most part. Maybe there's small islands in them, but I don't think that's where this is going. Ultimately, I'm hopeful, though.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, absolutely. So what you're saying then, Michael, is that that you've got the traditional orange corporate. So for people who I'm not familiar with what these colors represent, so you've got the corporate meritocracy type organization, the corporate that is looking, could be mostly for profit, but it's pursuing some kind of goal at the expense of anything else. It's like very singular track mind. And then we're trying to bring in something agile, which is about community. It's about connection. It's about self-organization, innovation. And so instead of looking at these organizations, which, as you say, don't want these core principles that create agility, that there are other companies who do have this, that these islands, these smaller companies who do share these principles, where this, where agility and the organizations that we had hoped that we were bringing about, these amazing type organizations where you can bring your whole self together.
Yes, and in one sense, we seduced them for a while into our vision, and then we got to the reality, and they didn't want our vision.
Yeah, I like that. It was definitely
they wanted cost cutting, and we can do some of that. But so many agile coaches tread this line of, I'm trying to create an empowered, self-organizing, highly productive team, and they get told by management, we want you to cut costs.
Yeah.
Where's the measurement of so.
Yeah. Thank you, Michael. Thank you for
Value
sharing.
shift. Yeah, you're welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So we've got two more hands. That's probably what we've got time for. So Dennis.
I'll be quick and to just share some observation or some perspective I've gained over the last few months of being benched by the market, as I like to call it, or professionally bought, whichever one you prefer, really. That's my go-to terms. And it kind of comes because when you're on the market, you have to do marketing. And some of you will have seen some posts I've done over in the breakfast community about weighing learning versus marketability of stuff. And I come back to the sense of a problem, I haven't a clue what I am these days, professionally speaking. I say agile coach because that's the closest term, but we have like 50 people in this room you could call an agile coach, and we do 50 different things for organizations. We probably have we're 50 different T-shaped people, but we're all called the same thing. I think one of the things that's happened, I mean, this goes back to Liz Atkins, like Agile Coach Competency Framework. That's a great framework. That's a great thing to sort of rally your professional identity behind, but it still represents 3 different academic backgrounds and 4 different full-time professions that we've kind of merged into this thing we called an Agile Coach. And then I think, to be honest, it's kind of time, and I hate to say it, but for that like agile identity to kind of collapse and give way to more specialized identities that more better capture the kind of problems that we're helping to solve and the kind of value that we can bring to organizations, because we keep having more and more Scrum Masters, we keep having more and more Agile coaches, and we keep solving more and more different problems. Every year there's a new trend and new things to get specialized in, and we can't be specialized in everything. So it's no wonder that when a company needs an Agile coach and they go out and they look for an Agile coach, they often don't find a person uniquely specialized in that. They find somebody else who has some skills in that, but it's not the deep expertise. It's the branch of the T-shape. And also personally, I'm tired of having like deep expertise and stuff, but never getting to use that deep expertise because I'm always out there solving problems that fall under the branches on the T-shape. So I think the identity behind is becoming too broad and too vague. And I read a great book the other day called The Business of Expertise, which has a lot of subject around positioning in it. And I think it is kind of, I wouldn't be surprised if we're seeing more and more, if we're going to see more specialization of identity into product operations, into, organizational transformation, into, like Kanban, lean flow metric, like predictability and these other things over the coming years. And I would love for somebody to throw me in the right direction, and if more thought on this, because I have an identity crisis as a professional.
Well, fair enough, Dennis. I don't think you're alone. I think that there are many people who are, the roles are specializing. People are trying to absorb the agile mindset, agile work that agile coaches have been doing and put it into different roles. And people are supposedly doing this as well as doing a product owner role or a product manager role. We couldn't do it as agile coaches. It was so hard. How are you going to do it as a part-time role? I've no idea. But basically, the product ownership and so there's product as a way that some agile coaches have been moving into as it's been harder to get roles. Delivery managers along how do you deliver things, moving into other areas. Some people even move into kind of more of an HR people type approach. How do we create a better organization through HR? So I do think that there has been some shift into some roles like that. So yeah, identity crisis. It's very interesting. I can't really open this topic up massively now because we're running out of time, but I'd be very interested to do another report at some point or a study. If anyone else wants to do this, more than welcome, tracking specific types of neurodiversity into the agile coaching roles and how whether there's a match here of being able to look broadly and be able to tunnel deeply and see what there is, see how this landscape fits, because I'm pretty sure we're going to find some pretty amazing things if we look at map neurodiversity to these roles, because I reckon there's some pretty big overlaps there. But I've got no data to back that up, just my anecdotal observations.
Yeah, I'm happy to talk more about that. And yeah, if my closing comment would be, if anybody has ever been to 2 interviews for an agile role where they actually wanted the same thing from you, the person, then I think shout, because frankly, I've yet to have that happen. I always want something different from me.
Thank you for sharing, Dennis. Thank you. And the last one will be Farah. Thank you.
Thank you. I know this is very greedy, Hamza.
All right.
Yeah.
You're allowed.
I'm wondering if I might share a reflection that I think is somewhat reflected in the first part of the report, looking at some of the broader economic, political, and societal shifts. Certainly, we have heard a lot about a move towards perhaps more traditional, familiar ways of working against complexity. I do wonder sometimes whether given the amount of change, the amount of uncertainty, and the amount of difficulty, instability, VUCA, whatever you want to call it, there is, whether a lot of organizations and leadership teams having to deliver something themselves in their organization are noticing what they see as chaos rather than complexity. And when we face chaos, we need to control something. And whether that's true or not, seeing chaos means that one might apply a chaos fixing strategy to that. Certainly, I have seen the last 3 organizations that I've worked for move much more towards a control based assurance, lack of trust outlook. And I think that is in response to, hey, we gave all these people all of this empowerment and we were doing well. Now we're not doing well. If we could just get a handle on something and how we work, then we can control at least this. Yeah. It's the only thing we can control. So let's control it. This is the factor that we can work on. And complexity is a hard thing to deal with, especially when there are multiple factors that are out of your control. I'm wondering if the workforce and the ways of working are the only thing left to people in order to apply that feeling to address their own fears.
It's very interesting what you say actually about the shift there. There's some work done by a chap called David Hawkins around, it's called A Map of Consciousness. If anyone reads my Substack, you'll see I've written a fair bit about it. It's really about, and also you could look at this in Maslow's hierarchy, but that's a very, very gross representation of us as humans. But when we look up, when we have abundance, when our needs are being met, when things are going well and we're in flow, we tend to have a higher state of consciousness in the sense of our ability to deal with complexity. So we're more able to be conscious of what is needed. We're better to build better relationships. We're more transformational within ourselves. When times of lack and hardship, when things are traumatic or difficult, often our level of complexity thinking drops. So what our actual internal state drops, which shifts our level of consciousness or our level of ability to when I say consciousness, I mean what we're conscious of, our awareness. So our ability to deal with complexity decreases, and then we tend to enter into a transactional relationships much more, and end up sort of seeing things in a really stressed out state of them and us. So it kind of goes from, hey, look, we're all in this together. I've got loads I can be willing to share, take opportunities, take risks, to, right, this is mine and you're you and I'm me, and I'm going to make sure you don't get my stuff kind of thing. It's like, you know, them and us. So you've gone from very big, wide connection relationships down to I'm protecting mine. And that is very much an internal state. And as the world changes and more complexity, I do think that the world has shifted, hopefully temporarily, into a slightly lower state of what I call consciousness or ability to deal with things, mostly because we've got looming war on our doorstep and we've got all these other crazy shit going on in the world. It's like, it's not surprising we feel a little bit like, you know, it's a bit like, well, right, protect what we've got. So, you know, the more the world eases up and the more the world goes back and hopefully back into a good space, maybe we'll see sort of these higher level thinking things come back out again. And we'll then, these tools that are based upon higher levels of awareness, consciousness, and complex thinking will then become more relevant again, because they make sense suddenly because we're in a different state. Yeah, really, thank you for sharing that, Farah. Thank you. Thank you. So thank you everybody for all the contributions, all of the, thank you if you've been a part of filling out the surveys and the data as well. And thank you for being here. Thank you for the questions, and thank you for being interested. It's a world in which we play a key part in being able to make a difference. And sometimes it feels it's a thankless job. It's a lonely job. But just by the fact of how many people have turned up here, how many people have bothered to fill out the things, be part of this, you know, we're not alone. We all do hope for something which is a better place, a better way of connecting, better relationships, and that's the journey we're on. So keep going, and thank you for being here. Thank you. So we'll end the call here, and I'll try and make this available through the YouTube AWA YouTube channel, most likely. So yeah, so someone's saying, where's the recording? Adventures with Agile, it's still called, on the YouTube channel. There's 200 odd videos there of meetups. We'll add it there, and I'll also probably publish it on the Deeper Change website as well. So you've got so you can download it and see it. Thank you. Awesome, everyone. Keep going, and let's keep making this world a better place. Organization by organization. Thank you. Take care, everybody.